everybody. It's time for your morning ice. What's going on, everybody? This is In the Crease with Tommy C, your morning ice. Let's go over last night's games in the National Hockey League. The Minnesota Wild take the Boston Bruins. The Wild does the Wild does to the Bruins what the Rangers did to them the other night. They turn around a 2-goal deficit in the third to make it 4-3. Wild over Bruins. The Winnipeg Jets take the New York Islanders 4-3. Andrew Ladd scoring twice, including the game winner early in the third period. The Los Angeles Kings go down, surprisingly, to the Philadelphia Flyers in overtime. And the New Jersey Devils get blown out by the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Devils actually led in this game at one point. Sidney Crosby just explodes, and the Devils. Pittsburgh takes that 8-3. The Ottawa Senators take out the Columbus Blue Jackets 5-2. The Arizona Coyotes get blown out. Yotes get struck by lightning. Tampa takes them 7-3. The hapless Connor McDavid. I'm not going to even call them the Sabres anymore. It's the Connor McDavid sweepstakes. Toronto takes them 4-0. Anaheim takes the Chicago Blackhawks. Shuts down the potent Chicago offense, and they win that game 1-0. The St. Louis Blues over the Dallas Stars 4-3. Vladimir Tarasenko with the overtime winner, and that notches his first career hat trick. The San Jose Sharks over the Colorado Avalanche, and the Carolina Hurricanes get taken by the Nucks. That's right. What's happening, everybody? I'm Tommy C. Welcome to my craze. Today, I got nobody in it besides myself due to, we have to pre-record. We can't do the show live every day, but we are more than happy to make sure we push out some kind of episode Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. In the hockey news, there's a lot of things going on, but I wanted to do this show about Gordie Howe, and apparently he's suffered a stroke. I mean, other NHL news, David Backes, captain of the St. Louis Blues, he leaves the game with an injury. There's also a lot of talk about John Moore, the New York Rangers, and what his suspension will be. He will get suspended. It will be what it will be. But I'd like to go over with you right now the actual Gordie Howe had a stroke, and by all reports, it's quote-unquote pretty serious. Gordie Howe is now 86 years old. He had a tough summer. He had some spinal surgery, and just before this most recent stroke, he was making sure he was walking at least 1 mile a day. And now we all hope Gordie recovers as soon as possible. Gordie, of course, named Mr. Hockey. He is a hero to tons of Canadian and American hockey fans. That's why I'm sporting the Detroit Red Wings jersey today. But I just, instead of concentrating on the downside, I suppose, and Gordie's in pretty bad shape, I'd like to go over, I guess, Gordie's career as well. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to sit there and talk about, it's bad. This is not good. And rather than do that, I'll let you know that what I'm doing right now, I'm actually trying to get a famous NHLer's daughter who passed away on this show. And one of the reasons I do this is because, look, most of the guys that listen to this are between the ages of 15 and 40. And they never really got to see a player like Gordie Howe and some other NHL legends. And with our theme of badass dudes, I think it's important to bring these former NHL players to maybe a modern audience. Game of hockey was very different. Well, of course, only 16 when Gordie Howe started playing hockey. I think it's important to know, I guess, the history of the National Hockey League and these great legends that influence players that we liked growing up, like Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier, etc. Gordie Howe was born to Abe and Catherine Howe in a farmhouse in Florida, Saskatchewan. He is one of 9 siblings. Of course, very, very, very different world back then to be born 9 siblings. He was one of only a handful of skaters, and I would love to know if there's actually anybody like this anymore that was actually ambidextrous. He could go with a right shot or a left shot. He could switch sticks. Now, I don't know how often he did that, but just the ability to do that. I mean, if you wanted to go, if you wanted to, change your stick depending on which glove hand, whether a goalie's lefty or right, that's a huge advantage. I'd actually I looked up a lot of stuff. I'd like to know what Gordie did if he actually switched sticks depending on what kind of goal he was going up to, which makes it more like a baseball situation, going up against a left-hander or a right-hander. That's actually pretty interesting. He was invited as a very young man to a New York Ranger training camp in Brooklyn at the time. And, of course, the Rangers took a look at Gordie Howe, saw how great he was, and told him he didn't make the team. What a different what a different landscape for the New York Rangers had they actually taken Gordie Howe. I wonder if the 54 years from 1940 to 1994, the 54 years that it took for the Rangers to win a Stanley Cup, would that have been different had there been a Gordie Howe, a number 9 Gordie Howe, which would have changed a lot of retirement numbers in the stands? That's actually kind of fascinating to think about. He was signed with the Red Wings. He was assigned to their junior team, the Galt Red Wings, and he made his NHL debut October 16th, 1946, 2 years before my father was born, playing right wing for the Detroit Red Wings, scoring in his first game at the age of 18. It's interesting how many superstars score on their first game. Probably the most famous in recent memory would be Mario Lemieux, when they actually they tuck one in their first game. It's almost a sign of big things to come. We also use a term in hockey called the Gordie Howe hat trick, which is, of course, a goal, an assist, and a fight. Gordie had a penchant for throwing down. He was not afraid of anyone. It wasn't like it was nowadays, where where rarely stars fight. Gordie was really able to stick up for himself and other teammates at any time. Now, that was more of a requirement in the 40s and 50s and 60s, that you had to stick up for yourself. You had to be able to fight. Maurice Richard, a small player as he was able to, he could throw down with the best of them. But Gordie had a penchant for fighting. Now, the Gordie Howe hat trick himself, that he made this famous, Gordie Howe only had 2 Gordie Howe hat tricks in his entire career. It's just, I guess it's a funny joke that's stuck around during the years. It'd also be interesting to know who has the most Gordie Howe hat tricks of all time. Something tells me, whoever it is, he's more than likely in the Hall of Fame. Gordie led his team to 4 Stanley Cup victories. The Detroit Red Wings in those days were pretty much like they were now, and pretty much they've been since the mid-90s, contenders. Every year, Detroit fielded players that really could vie for the Stanley Cup, and 4 Stanley Cups, especially in years where the Montreal Canadiens were so good, is quite impressive and really shows you his prowess. Gordie Howe was a power forward in his day. His strength was really unmatched by other players. He could power through you. He also had a beautiful shot, a wrister, and a great sense for the game. He was truly the greatest star and probably the greatest hockey player in the world up until that point. I'm sure Habs fans would disagree with me on that, but hey, that's my opinion. The Ranger. Why do I have the Rangers defenseman John Moore in my dumb notes? Well, I guess we'll get rid of this. Howe played with the 2 other Hall of Famers, of course, Sid Abel and Ted Lindsay. They were noted as the production line. That's because they just scored an insane amount of points, and of course, we have the reference to the production line in Detroit. Detroit was a thriving city in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, unlike it is now. And, of course, it's famous for its car production. So we have the production line and the productionists being Sid Abel and Ted Lindsay, who were both spectacular players in their day at their own right. Gordie Howe, like I said before, he was probably the superstar of the league. He was the English-speaking superstar. When he came up in 1946, they made a lot of comparison to the Maurice Rocket Richard, and there was sort of I hate to call it like racism or stuff like that, but if you were English speaking in Canada, you pulled for Howe generally. I wouldn't say in all cases. This is, of course, a broad generalization. And then if you were a French, a Quebecer, and spoke the French language, Mr. Rocket Richard was your favorite player. A tough guy in his own right. And there's another thing, is they both wore the number 9, so it was really which number 9 did you like, which is interesting because when Gretzky was growing up, he obviously idolized Gordie Howe, which is always strange to me because Gretzky did not play the game like Howe did. There was aspects of his games that Gretzky adopted, but it was mostly in the offensive area. Wayne Gretzky, as we know, was not a guy to throw down. I think he only had 3 fights in his career, and they really didn't go very well. Of course, Gretzky, while he was a great defensive player, was never a physical presence, only really crossing 200 pounds very late in his career. So we have 2 number 9s, and then of course, 99, the great Gretzky. I wonder, actually, from what I was told, it's sort of like now for Canadian kids, like you can't play on a team and ask for 99. That's kind of an obnoxious thing American kids tend to do. Nobody will wear 99. It's too obnoxious. But apparently Grutz asked for number 9 because that was his favorite player, and they told him something similar. Nobody wears number 9 in the league, in any league. So he's like, why don't I just give you another one then? Which is interesting. I think that's actually kind of fascinating. Gordie Howe suffered very early in his career a horrible, horrible injury. He botched a check to Toronto Maple Leaf Ted Kennedy, where he went to the boards in the 1950 playoffs. It severely fractured his skull. They had to rush him to the emergency room to keep the swelling from actually impacting his brain. This was considered life-threatening and career-ending at the time. Gordie Howe came back the next year and returned with a record 86 points, winning a scoring tally by 20 points. I mean, that's nothing short of amazing, the kind of guy old Gordie Howe was. It's at 40 years old, Howe reached new scoring heights. So this is a guy that really didn't slow down. He hit 100 points for the only time in his career with 44 goals and 59 assists. 44 goals today. It makes you far and away a superstar. Now, when I was growing up, 40 goals was still a superstar, but we see so few 40-goal scorers in the league, especially since the dead puck era. It's sort of like, honestly, scoring 44 goals back then is really like, it would be like scoring at least 50 goals in the 80s and 60 goals now. I mean, that's really amazing. Of course, 100 points. There isn't more than 1 or 2 players a year that cross 100 points normally. I mean, we have situations like, of course, Sidney Crosby and what have you. But the 100-point mark is become increasingly more difficult to hit even by today's NHL players. And that has nothing to do with the current NHL player skill level, as the players certainly weren't better than they were back then. Of course, they're in much better shape. They know more about the human body. They know how to train better. Guys in those days smoked, they drank, and what have you. It's just that the game's changed so much. And mostly, as Wayne Gretzky points out, the defense have gotten better. They've gotten more skilled, whereas when I was a kid, they were big, rugged guys that basically went to knock you down. There's a lot more to being an NHL defenseman, not just an offensive defenseman either. There's a lot more to be a defensive defenseman now. So Gordie didn't agree with Gordie was able to take advantage of the sort of the big, rugged, maybe slower defenseman. Also, when Gordie did that, when he scored 100 points, the NHL actually expanded. They took in teams like not the Hartford Whalers, like the St. Louis Blues. They went to a 12-team format rather than 6 format. This made the depth thin out a little bit. And, of course, Gordie was able to take advantage of that with all his experience. After 25 years, in 1970-71, Gordie Howe had a serious wrist problem, and he did not want surgery for it. And he also had some trouble with the Red Wings being paid a little more than $45,000 a year, and he wasn't even the highest paid player on the team. NHL owners were legendary for being unbelievable cheap, even for a guy that brought in so much money like Gordie Howe. When he retired, he actually got an office job, and he wasn't very happy with it. It was pretty boring because it was almost like a Babe Ruth situation. He was just brought on to say that he was a part of the organization, but he really didn't have much to do with the organization. Now, this is where things get interesting. A year after that, Gordie Howe was offered a contract by the WHA, the World Hockey Association, and the World Hockey Association attempted to compete with the National Hockey League. And one of the ways they did that is they actually offered contracts to guys like Bobby Hull, who played for the Winnipeg Jets, who had a legendary career with the Chicago Blackhawks, and they also brought in Gordie Howe. And one of the things that was so enticing about Howe going to the Houston Aeros or the WHA, that's where he would end up playing with the Houston Aeros, of course, is that his sons, Mark and Marty, were both signed to contracts. And, I mean, this is it's pretty wild. And in some cases, they played on the same line for long periods of time. I mean, how bizarre is that? Your dad's 42, 43 years old, and then you're playing on the same line as he is. That's really, and it was actually a great selling point for the WHA as well, to say, like, look, this is old time hockey. You can go see Gordie Howe and his young sons, and it was a fantastic situation for the WHA, and it actually made the National Hockey League nervous, as we'll get into a little bit later. Let's see, Howe, if I got my notes correct here, like I said, he with the wrist problem, with the wrist problem, he actually went and got the surgery. The surgery was a big success, and he would actually play almost another 10 years in the WHA. We'll get into that a little later. In his final season in the WHA, Gordie Howe had the opportunity to play with one Wayne Gretzky, another one of my hockey heroes. He was in the 1979 WHA All-Star game. This is a really interesting format because they played a best 2 out of 3 series with hockey club Moscow Dynamo. So you have to get the Russians over. You have to get the Russians over, and the result, which I don't have in front of me for whatever reason, I think my notes got a little screwed up. Of course, the WHA All-Star team went over the Moscow Dynamo, who is actually playing in the KHL right now. So that would have been a real great. I mean, the legendary battles between Team Canada and Russia in the 70s are just, we could do a whole show on that completely. When the WHA folded in 1979, the renamed Hartford Whalers joined the National Hockey Leagues. While the Red Wings still held the NHL rights, even though he had retired 8 years earlier, the Whalers and the Red Wings reached a gentleman's agreement in which the Red Wings agreed not to reclaim him. So he actually became Hartford Whaler property. The Houston Aeros would end up moving to Connecticut, and they became the Hartford Whalers, as we all know. And Gordie Howe, in his late 40s, early 50s, would play in the National Hockey League. Gordie Howe, of course, played until he was 52 years old, and he played his last 2 seasons in the National Hockey League. Hull had experienced dizzy spells in the late part of his 1978-1979 season. He underwent intensive battery of tests before making his decision to play in the 79-80 season. He was 51 years old at the start of that season, and he played all 80 games, and he notched 15 goals at the age of 51. He actually is tied with Chris Chelios as far as the most NHL seasons played. He probably would, had he stayed in the NHL, which he could have, had he thought to get the wrist surgery and didn't want to play with his sons, he probably could have had a lot more. No NHL player has played past the age of 48, which is just ridiculous. The fact that you could score 51 goals in the National Hockey League in the early 80s with teams like the the dynasty New York Islanders, the emerging dynasty of the Edmonton Oilers is nothing short of amazing. So I'm drooling all over Gordie Howe, and for good reason. I just like I said before, I want to show, I guess, younger folks that there were I guess I want to make a connection to these type of players. I want you to go look up. I want you to go buy a Gordie Howe book. I want you to check it out, because there were just different types of men. We don't really make guys like this anymore, and I just think it's important. Like I said, I'm working on that other interview. I really want to get it, and it's important to tell you. I mean, one of my favorite stories of Gordie Howe, of course, there's a lot of connection to Wayne Gretzky. I read Wayne Gretzky's book, and I really enjoyed it. And one of the things, the first time, there was always comparisons, even when Gretzky was like 11 or 12 years old, to Gordie Howe, that he would be the great one. Wayne Gretzky was nationwide. As a child, he was known throughout the entire nation of Canada as maybe possibly a guy that would become the greatest player of all time. And Wayne tells a story that I guess they were supposed to play in some big game in the WHA. It may have been in that Moscow Dynamo game. He had never played with Gordie as his hero, and Wayne looked at him and said, hey Gordie, I'm really nervous. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. And Gordie looked at him and said, yeah, I am too, kid. And they commenced to play the game. It's the confidence. It's the I guess the macho legend of Gordie Howe. Gordie Howe played in Legends games. I remember 2 airing in ESPN. I think it would be between 1990 and 1992, and he skated in both of them, being well over 60 years old. And I got to be honest with you, I remember watching those games. He wasn't his ass wasn't dragging out there. Gordie actually took pretty good care of himself after he retired. He was scoring goals and having a good time. Now it's just amazing to me, somebody at that age could just be so free flowing with the white hair and the sort of wings that he had in the back of his head. It's just nothing short. It's nothing short of amazing, and we really, it's sad that he's suffering so much right now, and I hope, and this is a wish from the entire Shot from the Point family, even a St. Louis Blues fan like Jeff the Huffman, that he has a big speedy recovery as soon as possible, and maybe we can see him again. There is reports that Gordie's cannot move parts of his body, that he needs help up, that he can speak, but it's extremely difficult, and nobody really should have to suffer like that, and we wish him the best. To give you an idea of what this man's greatness is, let me just knock a few of these out. Most regular season games played. These would be all his records. Most regular season games with a single team. Most NHL and WHA regular season games played, 2,186. Most NHL WH games playoff games played. So you got to remember, he was playing all these games. He wasn't just showing up when he was healthy. He was playing full seasons with the WHA and all 80 games in the NHL in one of his final seasons. Most regular season goals by a right winger, 801. I think that would be eclipsed by Wayne Gretzky. Most regular season points by a right winger, 1,850. Most consecutive 20-goal seasons from 1949 to 1971. I mean, a bad year. That means bad year for Gordie Howe is 20 goals. First player to score 1,000 goals, WHA, NHL regular season combined. Of course, Wayne Gretzky would go on to beat that record as far as the NHL was concerned. First player to reach 1,500 games played in NHL history. Most times leading NHL playoff scoring, 6. The oldest player to play in the NHL, 52 years, 11 days. The first Red Wing in history. First in Red Wings history, points, goals, and games played. Second in assists. The most NHL All-Star game appearances at 23. Absolutely an amazing career for Gordie Howe. And I think the reason I want to talk about Gordie Howe in this sort of is something we talk a lot about, Shot from the Point Live, and it's like this sort of increasingly feminized. I don't even like the word, but I don't think that's even the right word. In a world where macho behavior has become something of a negative rather than a positive. Of course, it can be a negative. I think the reason that people like Gordie so much is because he never apologized for who he was, and on top of that, he was great. It wasn't like he was just a guy that ran his mouth all the time, act like a tough guy like Paul Bassinet and what have you. He was Paul Bassinet was never at the top of his game in his position. Gordie Howe was, and he carried himself with class, but he also he was never afraid to mix it up, and to really put it simply, is Gordie Howe was a badass, and I mean that. He was a real, genuine badass. I mean, we talk about. I mean, I know people are uncomfortable with calling athletes heroes, and I understand that because you think of policemen, military personnel, and firemen who do their dangerous jobs at a for almost not even close to the type of money that professional athletes make nowadays. I think it's to really put it this way. While Gordie Howe might be not one of those heroes, as a person who was in the military, how come I consider him a hero? Obviously there's a difference between the two types, but I think it's important to keep our heroes in the forefront, no matter when they may have played, and to sort of fight back this. I don't know. My father likes to say chickifying, but softening of North American males by pointing to somebody like Gordie Howe. And, I mean, those are the type of players I like. Those are the type of players that I like now. One of my favorite players in the league is Jerome McGinley. A lot like Gordie. Had all the skills and willing to defend his teammates. And I don't think anybody could say that Jerome McGinley can't defend himself. And, that's really where I'd like to leave it. Gordie Howe was a first-class badass. And like I said, we wish him recovery and to get well really soon. Tonight's games in the National Hockey League, only 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. All times Eastern for that matter. The Detroit Red Wings take on the Washington Capitals. And the late night game is at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Nashville Predators take on the Edmonton Oilers. Both teams playing very, very well of late. The Edmonton Oilers actually putting 4 in a row together. They seem to be coming together, but the Nashville Predators, sort of the surprise of the early part of the season, leading their division. They get it on. That might be a first-class game, so why don't you check that out. Thank you very much for coming to In the Crease with Tommy C, the straight-up hockey show. Normally we have either Dave Rose or Dead on Dave here to talk about today's issues, but we couldn't do that today, and I hope you come back tomorrow 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and also check out the legendary news show, the most hysterical editing offensive Shot from the Point Live on 3 p.m. on Sunday. So check us out tomorrow, 10 a.m., and then also check us out on Sunday. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you around. Time to go. Deuces.